All right, welcome everybody to Friday, and extra credit for this class. Yeah, so there's extra credit for this class today at 4 o'clock. One of my students in fourth semester computer science is going to give an introduction to Python, a programming language that we will be learning a little bit later in the semester. It's considered a very nice, friendly, approachable programming language for beginners, and so since you're going to be learning it later on, it seems like a good opportunity not only to get a head start, but also to get some extra credit points. So that will be here on Discord. There's a workshop channel, which you'll see if you scroll up a little bit. Workshops channel, but basically just join in voice chat, and you'll see and hear everything. The text chat will be in workshops though. Is Python easier than C++? Yeah, a lot of people think so. As far as like a day one experience, definitely. After about the first week, I think the differences sort of vanish, and by the end of the first semester, I would say C++ is probably better because C++ has stricter typing rules, and if you've never done computer science before, that won't make any sense to you. So basically, C++'s language helps find errors before you make them, sort of. Whereas Python, you find the problems when you run your program. C++, you find the program when you compile it for certain categories of problems. So, yeah, if you like graph it out, like Python starts off a little bit easier and then probably gets a little bit more difficult than C++ over time, just due to the way the type system works. What is more commonly used? Ooh, good question. And it's actually compounded by the fact that C++ is related to another language called C. So there's a TIOBE index of programming languages that kind of tries to estimate what people are using. And Python is number one. Okay. And growing also. C is very similar to C++ and is similar to C#. And so if you learn C++, you'll kind of pick up C along the way. And together, that's a bigger, more employable thing than Python. Now, they are different languages. You shouldn't treat them, interchangeably. But if you learn C++, you really do. It is pretty much a superset of C. Like, you just kind of learn C along the way. And if you know C++, it's really easy to learn Java, and it's really easy to learn C#. So if you learn C++, it kind of gives you languages 4 through 5, right? And the rest of these aren't really related at all. So, it's like I said, it's kind of a tricky question. Python, though, is technically the most popular language and is growing. A lot of people like it. I like it. I have really kind of nothing against it. Python oftentimes allows you to create programs, quick and dirty programs, just faster, like you just knock something out. What languages are taught at Fresno State? C++. It's taught at Fresno State. Well, this is Fresno State, right? So, we teach Python here, and we're going to learn Scratch, probably starting next week. Scratch is even easier. You're having a hard time getting the voice chat. Can someone invite you? Invite somebody into a voice chat. So, what preferred languages would you use for games? In game development, C++. It's the industry standard. C# is used if you use the Unity engine. Yeah, and C++ and Python do go together. It just depends on the project, and it's probably worth doing both. But again, we are going to be learning a little bit of Python later in the semester, so yay, get a little head start on that, get some extra credit. Yeah. Should be fine. It is Betancourt. He's the guy giving the talk. I think on Discord, It says Aaron's giving the talk, but they sort of switched off. So this is Bencourt. Bencourt's kind of like he wants to be a computer science professor someday. So like, please be very kind to him, and like, okay. So is C++ similar to C sharp? Yeah, I would say it's like 80, 90-ish% the same. C sharp is kind of like halfway between C++ and Java is kind of one way of thinking about it. They're all fairly related. Like there's sometimes where you just take entire blocks of code and it will run the same in C and C++ and Java and C sharp, right? Like the basics. It's when you get into the more advanced stuff they differ. Let's put it that way. Is it possible to mix coding languages in a program? Yes, it is. In fact, a lot of professional programs are just sort of Frankenstein mixtures of shell scripts and old Fortran from the 1970s that nobody understands, that has a C wrapper around it. So the C++ code calls the C code, which calls the Fortran code, and all that's coordinated by a script. And then you got a Python script that runs that, and yeah, I wish I could say that was uncommon, but yeah, it's pretty common. It's pretty common for there to just be a bunch of different things all kind of running at the same time. We'll be learning to code a program or something later in the semester. Yeah, probably starting next week. Depends. Depends. We're going to be doing more ethics today, and then we're going to be kind of done with like at least the ethical systems. Next week, I've invited a guest speaker who will be talking about sort of the housing crisis in Silicon Valley. And remember how we talk about social issues in computer science? That's one of the big three topics. Before you can really talk about social issues, though, you have to understand ethical frameworks. So you have some means of evaluating it, right? And I'm not going to tell you which ethical system to use. You can use whichever one you want. And so if somebody says, we should do X, Y, and Z, then you can say, well, I'm using the utilitarian framework, and from the utilitarian perspective, this is evil. It's wrong. Okay? And then somebody might say, yes, but I'm using deontology, it's right, and you can have a disagreement. It's fine. Ethics are a cornerstone of maintaining society. Yeah. And we're going to be talking about that today. Okay. Teach me all you know. I want to learn. Cool. Yeah, but Fresno State is mostly in C++. Okay. So we got through two of the big ones last time. Divine command theory, which is basically your religion defines what is good and evil. It's pretty easy to understand. The trouble is, like, if you talk to somebody from a different religion, it's like, well, if your religion says one thing and mine says the other, there's no higher authority than God to appeal to you to work out the differences. You know what I mean? So you're kind of stuck. Like, you can't really work out your differences with somebody, even if you're both divine command theorists and you have, if you have different religions. Ethical hedonism: pleasure is good, pain is bad. Pleasure again means a variety of good feelings. Pain is a variety of bad things: being shamed, being bullied, having your arm broken, that kind of stuff. And so it has kind of a mathematical appeal that some people like, where you can just sort of tally up, like, okay, well, we had 5 units of good and we had 4 units of bad, so this is a +1 good action, So there's a there's a certain like appeal to that, like that it's a rational, sort of mathematical way of determining good and evil, right? So that mathematical equation is called the philosophic calculus, which is, I just think, a fantastic name. I just love this word, calculus. The philosophic calculus, which means adding up the happiness caused by an action and subtracting the sadness, adding up the pleasure, subtracting the pain. And of course, there's no actual way of doing that, right? Because we have no way of measuring the happiness and sadness of something, right? And if somebody's brains are just like, wow, I really love murder, yeah, they're, well, it's a good action, so it's got issues. Um, so pros, like, in general, everyone wants to be happy, right? So it seems like a fairly uncontroversial thing until you start poking at it a little bit, that everyone wants to be happy. So if we do things that make people happy, it's good. It's one of the reasons. If you're talking about the Bay Area, which we will next week, the the Bay Area has a harm reduction program for drug addicts in San Francisco, where basically the city of San Francisco will give you needles, so that you can shoot up cleanly without getting AIDS. And a lot of people would be like, I don't like that, Like to me, the issue isn't even the giving out of needles so much as not having sharps containers. Like, I don't know if anyone here has ever worked. Anyone here ever worked in like healthcare? Anyone here diabetic? You know what I mean? Like, if anybody's ever worked with needles before in a professional setting, you know that the rules around sharps containers are actually very strict, right? And if you don't know what I mean, the slideshow is on Canvas, Daisy. You can find it in the. I'll show you. CSI 1, files, and then this one's push 5, ethical systems. So if you want to read these at any time, you can. So, sharps containers. So you might have seen these in like restrooms and things like that. Like, there's actually fairly strict laws regarding sharps containers, because if you step on a needle, like a friend of my wife's accidentally, got a fairly serious disease. He was working in a lab at City Pope in LA, and accidentally stabbed himself, and now has an incurable disease. So, there's things like that, and you can even, even under utilitarian framework, it's like, all right, pro, you're going to be reducing the number of drug addicts getting AIDS, right, or HIV, because they're not sharing needles anymore. We're giving them clean needles. Con is now there's going to be needles left kind of all over the street in San Francisco, and so you have to sort of weigh the health. If you're just looking purely at bodily health, you have to weigh those in balance with each other. And maybe it does have a net positive, but it seems to me like an even better thing would be to have sharps containers, next to trash cans and things like that, so people could put their used needles in them instead of putting it on the ground. And yeah. Okay, so it's egalitarian. That's also something that I was going for. It treats all people as the same. No person is more privileged than another. If the king gets 1 unit of happiness from taxing the people, and the people suffer 1 million units of misery, then it's an evil action for the king to tax the people. Right? So, yeah. So, yeah, but like I said, there's these things like called happiness monsters. Like, what if somebody just really likes murdering? So, yeah. Too much pain breaks humanity. Yeah. Too much pleasure brings ignorance. Too much pain breaks humanity. Yeah, and it seems like, it seems like usually people want something more than just pleasure. And that's a very common objection to utilitarianism. It's like, yeah, we want to be happy, but we don't want to just be happy just to be happy. We want to be happy because things are going right in our life. We want to be happy because, I'm doing well in my classes. Like, if somebody just, like, zapped me with the gun and be like, you're happy, I'd be like, what the hell is going on here? Why am I happy right now? I'd be like, what? Why? And so I think, a common objection to utilitarianism is that it just sort of confuses a byproduct of a good life with the goal. You know what I mean? Like, if you're living a good life and things are going well for you, and you're studying, you're working hard, you're achieving something, you're about to graduate, you're becoming competent at programming, you're gonna be happy, But like, that's sort of a byproduct of the good life, rather than, just being happy in and of itself. If that's all it takes, just inject yourself with heroin until you die. Like, you'll be happy for the rest of your short life. You know what I mean? So that's probably the most serious con to utilitarianism. And sometimes plain as split. Yes, like chili peppers, right? And so I don't even know how it handles that. Yeah. Okay, so now we're going to flip it around. We're going to play an Uno reverse card. And now we're going to talk about the big opposing school to utilitarianism. And this is called Kantian Ethics or Deontology. Kantian Ethics is a form of deontology. I should put parentheses here. It's the most famous kind of deontology. And deontology is a big word. It has nothing to do with a guy named Dion, if you're wondering. It means duty. Okay, duty. Right. So it's a duty-based system. It is about your obligations. You must do certain moral actions to be a moral person, even if the consequences turn out to be negative. It doesn't matter. What matters is you were supposed to do it. You know, if you if you have a kid, it doesn't matter if you're tired. It doesn't matter if you're sleepy. It doesn't matter if you're sick. If your kid's hungry, you get out a bottle of milk and you give it to him. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't matter if it's going to make you miserable. Like, like probably the net misery is like, you get woken up in the middle of the night to feed a baby. Like, you're going to be miserable, but it doesn't matter. You have a duty to feed that kid. It's your job. It's your job as a parent. Like, you have to feed that kid. It doesn't matter how you feel, how sick you are. You have to take care of them. And so, it doesn't matter. You're going to feel pain. Doesn't matter. What matters is your duty. So, the famous example, and I think somebody in chat last time talked about this, where the famous example is if a murderer comes to your house and says, "Hey, I want to murder your brother." Kant says we have an ethical duty never to lie. Okay, and so we have a duty to tell the truth, and that's pretty extreme. Like even some deontologists I know would be like, no, you can just not say anything. Like, even if you have an obligation not to lie, you don't have to like help a murderer out. You know what I mean? Like, just like, sorry, close the door. I would like to not answer that question, and close the door, or something like that. So this is a pretty extreme view, and even some Kantian scholars that I know kind of debate to what extent Kant would tell a murderer where somebody was, because you're sort of participating in a murder at a certain level, right? So, but the reason why he says this is, think about this. Like, you have an ethical obligation to always tell the truth. That's one of his things. Suppose you think your brother's here, the murderer comes to your house and he says, "Hey, where's your brother? I want to murder him." And you're like, "Oh, he's over at Save Mart." And the murderer goes there, and unbeknownst to you, your brother left the house out the back door, is at Save Mart right now. The murderer finds him and kills him. Now you're culpable in the murder, right? Whereas somehow you're not if you tell him where he is. And that doesn't make a lot of sense to me, so, that's the best I can do for you. Now, the big question is, of course, what duties do you have? How do you have a duty? How do you know that you have a duty to do something? Or how do you know that you have a duty not to do something? And under Kantian ethics, there is something called the categorical imperative. And the categorical imperative is this, and it has a certain amount of appeal to a lot of people. You must act in such a way that if everybody acted in that way, the world would be alright. I don't think he said aight, but that's basically what it comes down to. If everybody lied, then nothing, like, society would completely break down, right? You cannot like, if everybody lied 100% of the time, like, where's your brother? Oh, he's on the moon, Look, I'm just trying to give him his homework. Yeah, he's on the moon right now, I don't tell you. Like, literally, society would break down, nothing could be done. And so it's sort of that thing that, like, that a lot of people's parents would do, like, your mom might say to you, if all of your friends jumped off a cliff, would you jump off a cliff too? And that's kind of Kant. Kant's kind of like that person. Like, if everybody was lying, You know, think about it. Like, think about what would happen if everybody in the world lied all the time. You couldn't. But now think about if everybody told the truth all the time, right? Seems like a pretty nice place, right? Like society would function. Hey, can I borrow your lawnmower? I'll give it back to you tomorrow. Sure. And then you loan it to them, and they give it back to you tomorrow, and everything's nice, and society functions. And so under the categorical imperative, by just taking taking your thing as a hypothetical, like what if should we educate kids as a society? Well, think about it. What if every kid in America had 13 years, because K-12, right? 13 years of school. And all the kids in America were given 13 years of education. A Kantian would be like, yeah, it seems like the world would be a better place. All right, let's do the opposite. What if we gave kids no education? Does it seem good? I don't know. And you can argue about it, right? Well, even if the government doesn't do it, then private people would. And you can get into like debates. Like, this is not, this is not always a very clear-cut thing, right? Like, well, what if it's not free? What if we made people pay for it, like college, right? Should we make people pay for college? Well, what if we had free college? Okay. Well, that seems like we'd have more educated people, but who's going to pay for it? You have to take money from people to pay for it, and is it right to take money from people? You know what I mean? And so these things do get sticky. They do get sticky. Don't it's deceptively simple when it comes to things like murder. Like, I think everybody can agree that under the categorical imperative, murder is wrong. Why? Post now in chat. No, you disagree. Murder is not wrong under the categorical imperative. It's like Call of Duty, but in real life. I know you're joking. I'm messing with you too. So, yeah, it'd be like one giant first-person shooter game, if everybody was murdering everybody else. So, under the categorical imperative, why is murder wrong? Post now on chat. So many people are paying attention. There is murder zones alive. No, there will be one person. There will be one person alive. the winner, like it's like a Conan sitting on like a giant mountain of skulls. Like the Purge. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was kind of going to go there. I didn't know if anybody would get the reference though to the Purge. Are we including executions as murder? Ooh, like I said, it gets sticky. I don't know. Like, should the state execute people? Yeah. If we execute people, everybody, let's say, that gets, commits a serious crime, we're going to be murdering some innocent people. If we don't murder anybody who commits a serious crime, we might be incentivizing people to commit serious crimes. That's a sticky, it gets complicated, right? That's why there's conferences. Like when I was in college, they had a Kant conference. Did they call it a conference? They didn't. And I'm realizing now they should have. I don't know why they didn't. Welcome to the La Jolla conference. Oh my gosh, that would have been amazing. And like one of my philosophy professors spoke there and stuff like that. So, because you have a duty to act in such a way that everyone should act, so murdering would be something everyone shouldn't do. But you should not take what is not yours. When murders would be no order left, and everything would be a free-for-all. Taking a life is wrong because all lives have worth. Yeah, so Patina, what you're talking about there is maybe the next ethical system. I forget what order the slides are in. If you say that lives have natural worth, there's an inherent value to life. We're coming up on that one soon. It's like an ecosystem. Murderers live, we all die. You should never kill somebody as much as you hate them. Well, okay, so from a Kantian perspective, murder is wrong because if everybody murdered, then the whole world would collapse, right? Like you can't go to the grocery store because somebody's going to shoot you. You know what I mean? Like, it'd just be a disaster. But if nobody murdered, I don't know, that sounds like a pretty good society. You know what I mean? Like, okay, so we have an ethical duty not to murder. And that's how Kant's mind works. Like for every big question, he uses the categorical imperative and just says, all right, what if everybody did it? You know, and just kind of thinks about it. What if everyone did it? What if nobody did it? Which one's better? You know what I mean? So it's pretty straightforward, I think. Do you want to do another example of it? Because what about? It's a good example. What about learning a foreign language? Is learning a foreign language ethical under Kantian ethics? So you thought I was going to go with like theft or something like that. No, let's do something a little bit wilder. You know? Everyone's saying yes. Why? Why do you have a duty to learn a foreign language under Kantian ethics? Let's say. I'm not saying you're a Kantian ethicist, but it causes no harm. Well, the question of harm is a utilitarian question, right? To do Kantian ethics, you ask yourself, all right, let's imagine two worlds. One where everybody has a second language, and one where nobody has a second language. Discuss on Discord. And if you're watching this at home, if you're watching this recording at home, post your thoughts onto the Help Center, Seaside One. Remember, your attendance is, your participation is mandatory. It's not really attendance. Exactly. It's participation. And in order to do critical thinking, you must do critical thinking. To become a critical thinker, you must do it. So, there'd be no ban. What? To maintain order. Helps to improve communication in the diverse world. Very true, Patino. Very true. It only has a positive outcome. Execution, I think Via Ringo is still on the murder one. Chenault, maintain order in the world. Berisoro, it can open your mindset to different cultures. Treba, if nobody knew more than one language, communication across boundaries would be impossible. Exactly. Yeah, if nobody could speak a foreign language, it would be like, I was reading a story yesterday of the first Chinese guy to go to England. And he gets there, and the king of England, talks to him. The guy spoke, Latin, I think. And the dude's like the king of England's super impressed, has his painting painted and hangs it up in his bedroom. That's how much he liked the guy. And when he was there, I think it was Oxford or something, was like, hey, by the way, we've got all of these Chinese books and nobody here knows how to read them. Could you at least tell us what the titles of the books are and what they're about? Because we got this collection of Chinese and literally 0 people in England. I think this was before the UK. 0 people in England know how to read them or know anything about Chinese. And he's like, sure. And so he goes over to the Bodleian library and he's like, okay, this is a book of, math and Bodleian. Is that at Oxford? Yeah, it's at Oxford. And so he goes over there and he's like, and that's kind of, the point, right? To Kant, as Treba says, if nobody could speak a second language, then communication across boundaries would be literally impossible. It'd be like that, where you just got a bunch of Chinese books. You're like, I don't know what these mean. How do you trade with people? How do you talk to them? That kind of stuff. So it allows people to communicate with others. Different viewpoints should be open to others. The more languages in the world, the more humans can think independently. The question isn't, okay, I see. The more varieties of words there are, the more options we have to express ourselves. Okay, that's a very interesting point, yeah. Okay. There'd be no translators. Google Translate. If you've ever tried using Google Translate in a language class, it's not very good. Okay. But then again, Google Translate wouldn't exist either, because nobody would know how to make it. All right, so that's kind of an exercise in the categorical imperative. Just think about the two possibilities. What if everyone did it? What if nobody did it? And that tells you what your duty is. You guys understand? That's Kantian ethics. Okay. Another way that he puts it is to treat people as ends and not means. So don't use people as a means to an end, if you've heard that spoken before. If you want to get a promotion at work. You don't treat a coworker like, hey, could you do this job for me? And then you take credit for it and get a promotion and kind of step on them on the way up the ladder, is the way they put it. To Kant, that's, he actually considers this the same as what I just told you, which is very interesting because it sounds differently, right? The categorical imperative I just said before was, treat your actions as a universal. But he also says an alternative formulation, which seems completely different, is treat people as ends and not means, right? Don't use people. And, it's an interesting thing to think about, right? Don't use people. Treat them as a moral goal. Treat other people as a moral goal, not a means to achieving your objectives. They are the objective. Okay. So it's egalitarian. Again, it doesn't matter if the king is, up here and the people are down here. Everyone's the same. Now, to be fair, Kant was writing in a monarchy. He was writing in, I believe, Germany under Frederick the Great, I think, was the king of Germany at the time. It wouldn't be Germany then. Who was the king? Immanuel Kant. Prussia, Kingdom of Prussia, 1724 to 1804. Kings of Prussia. Frederick William. Sorry, not Frederick the Great. Frederick William. My bad. Okay. Anyway. So he was technically living under a monarchy, and so there's Kantian scholars say, like, he's made some compromise because he didn't want to be treated as a Democrat, what I mean? Like as somebody who's into democracy and stuff like that. So he has some statements about kings. They're like, oh, kings have their place and they ensure order, and so this one I want to put a little asterisk on because he was writing in a monarchy and he really didn't want to be like thrown in jail. So. If you read some of his stuff about kings and things like that, he's like, they're necessary. Like, imagine a world with kings and imagine a world without kings, and things with a fair king is better, than a democracy where the mob rules and things like that. So I'll put an asterisk on that one. Who here has been in a situation where they address multiple people in the second, but those multiple people wonder who you're talking to, and they think you refers to one of them rather than the group? Yeah, that's why the South has y'all. Right? The plural second person. And for whatever reason, like here you can't say y'all. You can say you all if you want, but y'all is just not allowed. So, do you understand? Do you all understand? Okay. Yeah. So, yeah. And a benefit of Kantian Ethics is that it's very straightforward to find. Well, maybe not very straightforward, because sometimes it gets sticky, like I said. People write papers and debate and things like that, But a lot of times you just be like, yeah, I think, maybe people should learn second languages, Okay. So I say y'all over text. Good. Yeah, my mom's from Texas, so you might hear some Texanism slip out every once in a while. Sometimes a man needs shooting. All right. For some actions like you'll get shot for that, or something like that, cheating at cards. All right. So for some actions like, is it ethical to drive a car? Yeah, it could be complicated, right? Like San Francisco Bay Area. Yeah, San Francisco Bay Area and Fresno have their own slang, right? Kearney confirmed as a cowboy. It's high noon. Yeah, okay. Yeah, and so it's a lot of times it's simple. Sometimes it's hard. Like, do you have an ethical duty to drive a car? And if you really want to make it interesting, what if autonomous vehicles are safer than human drivers? Do you have a moral duty to drive an autonomous vehicle? And a lot of Kantians would say you do, because you're putting people at risk by driving. If everyone drove an autonomous vehicle, roads would be safer, right? So it's immoral to drive a car. But like, what about now? Like, I don't know. That's a tough question. Because like, if nobody drove a car, how'd you get food? You know. So, okay, walk. You know, what is this? Europe? Right. You know, yeah. When I went to Europe, like I have a step counter on my phone. Like my step count went way up. I was like, I see why. I see. Yeah. Okay. Oil companies are moral. Yeah, it's a complicated question. It's a complicated question. Okay. And a lot of people say you should lie. Like if somebody's going to murder your brother, like you should lie to them. Because imagine a world where we lied to murderers. Like, doesn't seem to be problematic at all. So, you know, it's not as simple as it maybe seems at first glance. Okay. So now we're going to get to the one that somebody earlier was referring to, and they said, you know, human life has an inherent worth. So this is the. Oh no! Sorry, no. It's two down. Sorry. We'll do this one first, because this theory here is the ethical theory that makes up America. Somebody do like a bald eagle or something on chat. Okay. Locke theory. Yeah, very good. There you go. There's a bald eagle for you. So, natural rights theory is the foundation of the ethical system of the American government. Okay, at least in the founding fathers of the American government. So there was a philosopher named Joms. Don't speak too quickly. John Locke, and he was living in England in the 1600s, and was a very influential philosopher. Wrote on a lot of topics, religion, logic, you know, a lot of things. And one of his big points, one of his big thinks, was that humans have intrinsic rights. There is something special about human life, and you can talk about animals like some other time, it's fine, that there's inherent dignity and inherent worth in a human, right? And there's certain things that can be never taken away by default, I guess. And those are life, liberty, and property, right? Those are the most fundamental rights that a human can have, right? If you can just walk up to somebody and take their stuff, right? I mean, think about it. Like, they're like, what justification? Like, you know, just at a very fundamental level, like, what could be more basic than that, right? That you can't just walk down the street and murder somebody. You can't walk down the street and just imprison them. You can't walk down the street and just steal their stuff, right? These are the three most intrinsic rights that a human can have. And, you know, people have come up with lots of other rights as well. If you look at Norman Rockwell, there's the famous poster. You might have seen this in like your history classes and things like that. Freedom from want, right? The notion that people have more freedoms than just, you know, life, liberty, and property, right? So freedom of speech, right? The ability to go to a meeting with your government, stand up, have your voice heard. Freedom of worship, freedom of religion, right? Each according to the dictates of his own conscience. That's from the Bill of Rights. Freedom from want, which is not part of the Bill of Rights, and it's not, you know, part of Lockean philosophy either, but it's the notion that, controversial notion, that all humans have the right to earn a living and make money and put food on the table, you know, not go hungry, right? And nowadays we have programs like SNAP and things like that are food assistance programs for people. So we have adopted Rockwell's freedom from want, that if somebody's hungry, you can go to I don't know if you all know this, but there's food assistance available at both Fresno State and at Clovis Community College, where I teach. And I sometimes have students who are, they're called, I don't know what they're called, but they come to, and they speak about the food assistance programs. And then you have freedom from fear, right? Which, again, is not part of the Bill of Rights. It's not part of Lockheed Philosophy. Bombings, hit, horror, things like that. So they're tucking kids into bed. Back then, beds were smaller and people would share beds also a lot. So, there's other freedoms as well that people will debate if we have them or not. But Lockean philosophy is the big three is life, liberty, and property. Thomas Jefferson changed it in the Declaration of Independence to the pursuit of happiness. And so this is sort of the foundational philosophy, the foundational ethical and moral system for the American government. Okay. And we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They're endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. That's natural rights theory right there. There are certain unalienable rights. The government can violate them, but they can't take them away. Right? If the government, shoots you in the head because, they don't like you, they violated your right to life, but they can't take it away. All humans have inherent dignity and worth. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. So the purpose of a government is to protect the inherent rights of man, not to dominate or be tyrannical or to put people into a social hierarchy and have the people up tops, punching on the people down below. But the purpose of a government is for the government to protect the rights. Because, people will violate each other's rights all the time. Somebody will break into your car. It's happened to me repeatedly, especially living in, San Francisco. And people will violate your rights all the time, And so the government's job is to protect those rights. That's why we have police, right? The point of a police is to protect, life, liberty, and he says pursuit of happiness, but property, right? And and then there's a right to due process and things like that. And so the government derives their just powers from the consent of the governed. That power flows from the people to the government. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, whenever government becomes tyrannical, starts violating people's rights, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. So that right there is the thesis statement for the American government, right? And whether or not the American government has always lived up to those ideals, I think most people, most people would say it is, fallen in that task, depending on your political beliefs, in different ways, right? So left-wing people obviously would point to the whole point of the BLM movement, right, is that the police are destructive of those ends, right? Like that's the entire purpose of it. Is that it's in that spirit that the government is being destructive of people's rights. And then on the right wing, there's actually parallels. Like if you look during the Clinton administration, there was a shooting at Ruby Ridge where the FBI basically sniped a woman holding a baby, right, and blew her head off, right, like because they thought the husband was like an illegal gun runner, and I don't think he was even charged with any crime. They just kind of showed up with guns, and he's like, "Yo, no," and they blew his wife's head off. Like so the left and the right both have similar critiques, oftentimes, of the government. Just the BLM is obviously that the police is destructive, specific, like more than especially destructive. Let's put it that way, towards the rights of black people, right? And a lot of right wing people say they violate Second Amendment rights, and things like that. So there's I don't know anybody that says the U.S. government's perfect and has always protected these rights, but that's the thesis statement, right? Like that's what we're supposed to do. And if you don't like the way the government's going, you participate in the democratic process and you elect representatives that will represent your views in the government, and then they get change done, hopefully, right? That's kind of the central thesis of America. Okay. So, so basically they can be violated, but they can't be taken away. Okay. So under natural rights theory, moral actions are those that respect or defend those rights. So, for example, if I see a person about to be murdered, and I can run up and like wrest the gun out of the person's hand, which I probably would be too scared to do, honestly. But like, let's just say this is in my imagination, run up and take the gun away and pistol whip them and be like, "You're under arrest," and that would be a moral action, maybe not the pistol whipping, but like the protecting somebody's right to life, is considered a moral action under natural rights theory. Immoral actions are those that violate those rights. Okay. So the murderer is violating the rights, that's wrong. If you stop a murder, that's good. Okay. So that it's a pretty, I think, pretty straightforward ethical system, simply because like most people will agree we have a right to life, liberty, and property. Communists might not, right? Communists might say the right to property is maybe just personal property, like you can own a toothbrush, but you can't own a business. And so there's people that will argue on kind of the margins of that. Most people agree that you have a right to free speech and things like that. Although not as much anymore. Actually, the number of people that support free speech has been dropping in society. But things like life and liberty, yeah, most people agree on those. It also gives us a lens to critique the government, right? Because somebody mentioned before, like, what is legal is what is moral. And under natural rights theory, you have the right to look at the government and be like, nope, the way you're doing policing right now is destructive to my, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, right? So I want it changed. So it gives you an ability to critique the government, right? Cons. So one of the big thing is what happens when the rights conflict. Which one wins? Is there a priority? I think most people would put like life as like number one, right? So like a lot of people would say you can't murder somebody to stop them from stealing a chocolate bar, right? So you do have a right to not have your chocolate bar stolen, but like if you just like whipped out a gun and just went pow, 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 like a lot of people would be like, bro, like that's excessive, like it's a chocolate bar, get over it, you know what I mean? And so a lot of people would put life at top, and so you get these interesting discussions like, okay, so how far does the right to free speech extend? Like there's a common thing, like you can't shout fire in a theater, which Penn and Teller did a bit where every time you went to their theater, he would walk in and yell fire, fire, and like nobody ran out or panicked, he was kind of making a point about free speech, right? So like when these rights kind of bump up against each other, that's when it gets sticky. Like, on its own, yeah, stealing's bad, murder is bad, right? But can you murder to stop somebody from stealing? Like that, that's when you start writing the papers and you have debates and you have conferences and things like that on it. And also the question, like Roy Beard said, like what other rights do you have? Do you have the right to due process? Right? We have the Bill of Rights, which listed 10 rights that we have. Well, not all of them are rights. Like the 10th Amendment doesn't have anything to do with individual rights. And a big one is, do we only have negative rights or do positive rights also? Like, is there a right to employment? Right? Like Norman Rockwell, right? Is there a right that every person has a right to a job? Is there a right that every person has a right to a house? Is there a right that every person has a right to food on the table? And that is a big difference between left-wing and right-wing political thought. That's actually probably the fundamental difference between them, is that right-wing people only believe, maybe too broad a generalization, but the right is basically like you have a right not to be murdered, you have a right, these are called negative rights, you have a right not to be murdered, you have a right not to have your stuff stolen, you have a right to have people not come in and tell you can't say something, things like that. Whereas if you like look at like Bernie Sanders, he's like, everybody has a right to a house, everybody has a right to a job, everybody has a right to healthcare, everybody has a right to food, right? And so that's really kind of the fundamental difference in our society right now between the left and the right. It's like a fundamental difference in view on our natural rights only negative and that doesn't mean like emotionally negative, like crying or something. It just means like the government can't do this to you. They can't do this. They can't do this. The left oftentimes says the government must do this for you. They must provide you housing. They must provide you food. They must provide you healthcare. They must provide, a job. And that's sort of the fundamental divide. And personally, I think it's an interesting discussion. I don't, because, like if I could spend 1 penny and feed every person in America, I would do it in a heartbeat. If I could spend $10 and house every person in America, I would do it. And so, but Los Angeles, which started building housing for homeless people, was spending $600,000 per bed for a homeless person. $600,000 for one bed. And most people are like, if you gave me $600,000, I'll house a person. Like, do you guys see what I'm saying here? Like, and so it gets interesting. It gets really interesting when you actually get into the real world and like the cost of things and things like that. Nobody has any comment on that? Okay. So morals are supposed to be super complicated. Yeah. So, yeah, and so on Wednesday we're gonna have somebody coming in to talk about housing, and so that's to me this is the big divide. And personally, I think that if you understand that, then you start understanding the other side a little bit better. You know what I mean? Because there's a lot of division in America right now, and I think when you understand the sort of philosophical underpinnings of the differences, like then you're like, oh, okay. And like it stops being like you're like this horrible person who doesn't want to provide housing, but it might just be they don't want to spend $600,000 on a bed, right? And and there are a lot of right-wing people that are like, look, feeding people isn't really that expensive, so let's just feed them. Clovis School District right now has free meals for every kid. Fine, we'll just do free lunches for everybody. Like it's and Clovis School District's a fairly right-wing school district, right? And they're just like, we're just gonna feed every kid. Like whatever, we're not even gonna deal with all these like free to reduced lunch things. Just every kid gets a free meal. And so when you come down to it, I think a lot of the division is just not understanding why people have different views on things. So maybe I'm optimistic. I don't know. Maybe I'm optimistic. Any questions on natural rights theory? I guess we'll get to virtue ethics and finish that off on Monday. Next Wednesday, we're gonna have a guest speaker on the subject. We'll probably do this and then maybe get into Scratch on Monday. That should be fun. Start doing programming next week. Okay. Governmental failure and execution. Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like, all right, if there's a right to housing, then the government has to provide it. But what if they're spending $600,000 per unit? Then even the concept of spending $10 to provide housing different brings issues. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, and so people will even disagree with that, and that's fine. I'm just telling you, like the point I'm trying to make is that there's a dollar sign attached to these things, right? And that actually changes people's answers a lot of the time. Not always, but a lot of the times. Like if you could spend $10 a bed or $10 for every bed versus $600,000 per bed, like a lot of times you'll get different answers as a result of it. Yeah, good point, Sean. No other comments on this? Any other thoughts on natural rights theory before we sign off for the day? See ya. Okay. Bye. Have a great week. Okay. Sounds good. I will see you guys on Monday. Have a great time at the Superb Owl. See you all after Joe Burr wins. And extra credit is today at 4 o'clock. All right. Peace out.